You're an embarrassment. The words sliced through crystal and champagne like a blade through silk. Graham Dalton stood at the head of his own dining table, his face twisted in contempt as he stared down at his wife. Nia didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She went perfectly, terrifyingly still, and that's when he did it. He spat, right in her face, in front of 20 guests wearing $10,000 of jewelry each. The room didn't gasp. It held its breath. And Nia? She wiped her cheek with a linen napkin, folded it precisely, and set it beside her untouched plate. No tears, no screaming, just a smile so cold it could crack bone. Everyone thought she'd finally broken. They were wrong. She'd just finished counting. If you want to see how silence becomes the sharpest weapon of all, stay with me until the very end. And when you're done, drop a comment with your city. I want to see just how far this story travels. The spit hit her cheekbone first. Warm, wet, deliberate. Nia Dalton felt it slide down toward her jaw, slow as honey, while the entire dining room held its breath. She didn't move. Didn't wipe it away. Not yet. She let it sit there, glistening under the chandelier light, because she wanted to remember this exact moment. She wanted to burn it into her memory so deeply that years from now, when people asked her why she did what she did, she could close her eyes and feel the weight of that spit on her skin. Graham stood at the head of the table, chest heaving, his face flushed with wine and fury. His hand was still half raised, like he might do it again. Behind him, the floor-to-ceiling windows framed the San Francisco skyline. Glittering, indifferent, perfect. The kind of view that cost millions. The kind of view that told the world, we matter. But inside this room, Nia didn't matter at all. You're an embarrassment, Graham said again, his voice low and venomous. Do you understand that? An embarrassment. 20 pairs of eyes locked onto her. The guests, venture capitalists, old money, new money, people whose last names opened doors, sat frozen in their seats like mannequins. No one spoke. No one moved. They barely breathed. Nia reached for her napkin. White linen, monogrammed with a cursive D. She pressed it to her cheek, slow and deliberate, wiping away the spit with the same care she might use to blot lipstick. Then she folded the napkin in half, creased it, set it down beside her untouched plate. Still, she said nothing. Graham's brother Miles let out a sharp laugh from the far end of the table. Jesus, Graham. You really don't hold back, do you? Graham didn't look at him. His eyes stayed fixed on Nia, waiting, daring her to react. She didn't. Instead, she picked up her wine glass and took a sip. Slow, controlled. The Cabernet was probably worth more than most people's monthly rent, but it tasted like dust in her mouth. She set the glass down without a sound. Well, said Evelyn Dalton, Graham's mother, from her seat near the center of the table. Her voice was crisp, clipped, the kind of tone that had been sharpened over decades of charity galas and country club luncheons. I think we can all agree that some people simply weren't raised to understand the expectations of a family like ours. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. One woman, a tech CEO Nia had met once at a fundraiser, looked down at her plate like she wished she could disappear into it. Nia's hands rested in her lap, fingers laced together. Her nails were short, unpolished. She'd stopped wearing the acrylics months ago. Graham hated them, said they made her look cheap. Mom's right, Miles added, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. Some people just don't belong in rooms like this, no matter how hard they try. Across the table, Claire Hart, Graham's oldest friend, his work wife, as she liked to call herself, reached over and touched Nia's hand. Her fingers were cool, her smile soft and sympathetic. Ignore them, Claire whispered, just loud enough for the people nearby to hear. They're being awful. Nia looked at her. Claire's blue eyes were wide, concerned, perfectly lined with just enough mascara to look effortless. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost $3,000 and a delicate gold necklace that caught the light every time she moved. Nia wanted to pull her hand away, but she didn't. Because Claire wasn't her friend. Claire had never been her friend. Claire was a woman who thrived on proximity to power, who collected moments of other people's pain like currency, who would smile and comfort and whisper support, and then turn around and tell Graham exactly what Nia had said, how she'd looked, whether she'd cried. Nia had learned that the hard way, So instead of pulling away, she let Claire hold her hand. Let her play the role of the compassionate ally. Let her think she was winning. "Thank you," Nia said quietly. Claire squeezed her fingers. "Of course." Graham drained his wine glass and slammed it down on the table. The crystal rang out like a bell. "Are we going to sit here all night?" he said. "Or can we move on to dessert?" A waiter appeared from the shadows, one of 6 hired for the evening, all of them silent, all of them trained to be invisible. He cleared Graham's plate without a word and disappeared again. Nia watched him go. She wondered if he'd noticed what happened, if he cared, if he'd go home tonight and tell someone about the rich man who spat on his wife in front of a room full of people who did nothing. Probably not. People like him learned early to keep their heads down, to stay quiet, to survive. Nia understood that better than anyone. The dinner dragged on for another hour. Dessert was served, some kind of deconstructed cheesecake with edible flowers that cost more to plate than most people spent on groceries in a week. Conversation resumed in fits and starts, stilted and awkward, like everyone was pretending the last 10 minutes hadn't happened. Nia sat through it all. Silent. Still. A ghost at her own table. When the last guest finally left, when the waiters had cleared the dishes and vanished into the night, when the house fell quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Miles laughing somewhere upstairs, Nia stood. Her legs felt stiff, her back ached. She'd been sitting perfectly straight for 3 hours, spine never touching the chair, shoulders never slumping, the way Evelyn had taught her. "A Dalton woman doesn't slouch," Evelyn had said once, early on. Posture is power. Nia walked through the empty dining room, past the long mahogany table that seated 24, past the chandelier that cost more than her childhood home, past the original Rothko on the wall that Graham liked to tell people he'd bought at auction. He hadn't. His father had bought it. Graham had inherited it, along with everything else. She climbed the stairs slowly, one hand trailing along the banister. The house was enormous. 8 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, a library, a wine cellar, a gym, a theater room. 15,000 square feet of marble and hardwood and floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the whole place into a fishbowl. Nia hated it. She'd hated it from the moment she moved in, 3 years ago, when Graham had carried her over the threshold and kissed her and promised her that this was just the beginning, that they were going to build something beautiful together. She'd believed him. Back then, she'd believed a lot of things. The master bedroom was on the 3rd floor, tucked into the corner of the house with views of the bay. The door was open. The lights were off. Graham was already inside, standing by the window, his tie loose, his shirt untucked. He didn't turn around when she walked in. "You made a scene tonight," he said. Nia stopped in the doorway. "I didn't say a word." "Exactly." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You sat there like a martyr, like you wanted everyone to feel sorry for you." She didn't respond. Graham crossed the room in 3 long strides and stopped inches from her. He was tall, 6'2", and he used his height the way some men use their fists. He loomed. He crowded. He made himself impossible to ignore. "You embarrassed me," he said quietly. Nia looked up at him. His eyes were bloodshot. He smelled like wine and cologne and something faintly metallic, like anger. "I embarrassed you?" she said. "Yes." He leaned closer. "You sat there like a victim, like I'm some kind of monster. You spat on me." The words came out flat, emotionless, like she was reading from a script. Graham's jaw tightened. "You deserved it." Nia's chest tightened, but her face stayed smooth, blank. She'd learned how to do that, how to keep everything locked down so tight that nothing showed. No pain, no rage, no heartbreak. "Why?" she asked. "Because you don't listen." He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "I told you to wear the blue dress tonight. I told you, and you showed up in that." He gestured at her outfit, a simple black dress that she'd thought looked elegant. "That thing. Like you were going to a funeral." "I didn't think." "That's the problem, Nia. You don't think. You don't consider how your choices reflect on me, on this family." He turned away, pacing toward the window. "Do you have any idea what people say about you, about us?" She didn't answer. They say I married down, Graham continued. They say you're not one of us, that you don't belong. Nia's hands curled into fists at her sides. And what do you say? He stopped, turned, looked at her with something that might have been pity. I say they're right. No, she didn't cry. Not that night. Not the next morning when she woke up alone in the enormous bed and found a note on Graham's pillow saying he'd left early for a breakfast meeting. Not later that afternoon when Evelyn showed up unannounced and spent an hour criticizing the way the housekeeper had arranged the flowers in the foyer. Nia had learned a long time ago that tears didn't help. Tears just gave people like Graham and Evelyn something to use against her. Proof that she was weak, emotional, difficult. So she stayed calm, stayed quiet, stayed exactly where they expected her to be. She spent the morning in the library, a room she loved despite everything else. It was the only place in the house that felt like hers. The walls were lined with books, most of them untouched, bought by an interior designer to look impressive, but Nia had added her own over the years. Poetry, history, biographies of women who'd survived worse than she had. She was reading when Evelyn found her. There you are. Nia looked up. Evelyn stood in the doorway, perfectly dressed in a cream blazer and tailored slacks, her silver hair pulled back in a low bun. She looked like she'd stepped out of a luxury magazine spread, ageless, untouchable. I wanted to talk to you, Evelyn said, crossing the room without waiting for an invitation. She sat down in the chair across from Nia, crossing her legs at the ankle. Nia closed her book. About what? About last night. Nia's stomach tightened, but she kept her face neutral. Okay. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her expression concerned, almost maternal. I know Graham can be, intense. He gets that from his father. But you have to understand, darling, he's under a great deal of pressure. The company is expanding. The board is breathing down his neck. He doesn't need more stress at home. Nia stared at her. He spat on me. I know. Evelyn's voice was soft, soothing, and I'm not excusing that. But you have to see it from his perspective. He's trying to build something extraordinary, and he needs a partner who can support him. Not someone who, she paused, choosing her words carefully, who makes things harder. I didn't do anything. Exactly, Evelyn smiled. You didn't do anything. You just sat there, silent, letting everyone see how hurt you were. Do you know how that looked? How it made him look? Nia's jaw tightened. I didn't want to make a scene. Then you should have smiled, Evelyn said simply. You should have laughed it off, made a joke, showed everyone that you're strong enough to handle him. She reached over and patted Nia's hand. That's what a Dalton woman does, darling. We don't crumble. We don't sulk. We rise above. Nia pulled her hand away. Is that what you did? When his father treated you the way Graham treats me? Evelyn's smile didn't falter. His father never treated me poorly, because I never gave him a reason to. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and cold. Evelyn stood, smoothing her blazer. I'm telling you this for your own good, Nia. If you want this marriage to work, if you want to be part of this family, you need to learn how to play the game. She paused at the door, glancing back. Or you'll lose everything. Nia sat alone in the library for a long time after Evelyn left. She thought about the first time she'd met Graham. 5 years ago, at a fundraiser for a nonprofit she'd been working for. He'd been charming, confident. He'd made her feel like the only person in the room, like she mattered. She thought about their wedding, the way he'd looked at her when she walked down the aisle, the way he'd whispered, I love you against her ear during their first dance. She thought about the first time he'd called her stupid, the first time he'd told her she was lucky he'd married her, the first time he'd made her feel small. And she thought about Vera Lane. Vera was Graham's executive assistant, 26, blonde, efficient, the kind of woman who wore pencil skirts and heels and knew exactly how to laugh at Graham's jokes. Nia had caught them 6 months ago. She'd come home early from a doctor's appointment and found them in Graham's home office. Vera was perched on the edge of his desk, her skirt riding up her thighs, and Graham was standing between her legs, his hands on her waist, his mouth on her neck. They hadn't heard Nia come in. She'd stood in the doorway for 5 full seconds, watching, waiting for one of them to notice her. When Graham finally looked up, he hadn't even flinched. He'd just stepped back, adjusted his tie, and said, "We were going over the quarterly reports." Vera had slid off the desk, smoothed her skirt, and walked past Nia without a word. That night, when Nia confronted him, Graham had laughed. "You're being paranoid," he'd said. "Vera works for me, that's all." "I saw you. You saw two colleagues having a conversation. You had your hands on her, and you're being hysterical." He'd poured himself a drink, calm as anything. "If you can't handle the fact that I work with attractive women, maybe you're not cut out for this life." Nia had wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand the truth. But she didn't, because by then, she'd already learned that fighting Graham was like fighting a ghost. He'd twist her words, gaslight her reality, make her question everything she knew to be true. So she'd swallowed it, buried it, pretended she believed him. And Evelyn, when Nia had finally, desperately confided in her, had smiled and said, "Men like Graham have appetites. It doesn't mean anything. As long as he comes home to you, what does it matter?" Nia spent the rest of the day alone. She didn't see Graham until dinner. He came home late, smelling like scotch and expensive perfume that wasn't hers. He barely looked at her, just grabbed a plate from the kitchen, ate standing up, and disappeared into his office. She didn't follow him. Instead, she went upstairs into the walk-in closet that was bigger than her childhood bedroom and pulled out a small lockbox from the back of the top shelf. Inside was a single folder. She'd started building it 2 years ago. Quietly, carefully, a little bit at a time. At first, it had just been a way to feel less powerless, a way to remind herself that she wasn't crazy, that the things she saw, the things she felt, the things Graham said, they were real. But over time, it had become something else. A plan. Nia opened the folder and flipped through the pages. Bank statements, corporate filings, emails she'd printed when Graham left his laptop open, photos she'd taken when he wasn't looking, and at the very back, tucked into a plain envelope, was the document that changed everything. A stock certificate. Nia had found it in her father's things after he died, 3 years ago. He'd been a quiet man, a janitor. He'd worked nights at Dalton Industries for 30 years, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans, while men like Graham built empires on top of his invisible labor. But her father had been smart, smarter than anyone gave him credit for. And 30 years ago, when Dalton Industries was just a struggling startup, when Graham's father was desperate for capital, Nia's father had done something no one expected. He'd bought shares. Not many, just enough to matter. And then he'd held on to them. Through every merger, every acquisition, every stock split, he'd never sold, never cashed out. He'd just tucked the certificates away and told Nia these might be worth something someday. When he died, Nia had inherited them. She hadn't thought much of it at first, hadn't realized what she had. But then she'd started paying attention, started learning how the company worked, started understanding the power structure. And she'd realized something extraordinary. Between her father's original shares and the stock splits that had happened over the years, Nia owned 90% of Dalton Industries. 90%. Graham didn't know. Evelyn didn't know. Miles didn't know. No one knew, because the shares were in her father's name, and when she'd inherited them, she'd quietly, carefully transferred them into a trust. Anonymous. Untraceable. She'd been waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the moment when she could finally stop being invisible. Nia closed the folder and put it back in the lockbox. Soon. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. But soon. She was going to show them exactly what a Dalton woman could do, and when she did, no one, not Graham, not Evelyn, not Miles, not Claire, not Vera, would ever see her coming. The next morning, Graham announced at breakfast that there would be a shareholder meeting. "Big one," he said, scrolling through his phone with one hand while shoveling eggs into his mouth with the other. "We're going public with the global expansion plan. The board's been pushing for it. I'm finally ready to pull the trigger." Nia set down her coffee cup. "When?" "Friday." He didn't look up. "You don't need to come." "I'd like to." That got his attention. He looked at her, eyebrows raised. Why? Because I'm your wife. Graham laughed, short, sharp. Since when do you care about the company? I've always cared. No? He leaned back in his chair, studying her. You've always pretended to care. There's a difference. Nia held his gaze. I'd like to attend. Graham shrugged. Fine, but don't embarrass me. Friday came faster than Nia expected. She spent the days in between preparing. She reviewed every document in her folder. She rehearsed what she was going to say. She imagined every possible reaction, every argument, every escape route Graham might try to take. She didn't sleep much, but she didn't need to. On Friday morning, she dressed carefully. Not the blue dress Graham liked, not the black dress he hated. A red suit. Sharp, professional, powerful. When she walked into the boardroom at Dalton Industries headquarters, every head turned. The room was massive, 30 feet of polished mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. 12 board members sat around the table, most of them men, all of them in suits that screamed money and influence. Graham stood at the head of the table, mid-presentation. He stopped when he saw her. Nia, his voice was tight. I didn't think you'd actually come. I told you I would. He forced a smile. Well, take a seat then. She walked to the far end of the table and sat down. No one spoke. They just stared. Claire was there, sitting to Graham's right. She gave Nia a little wave, her expression unreadable. Miles was there too, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. Evelyn sat near the center, her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of cool disapproval. Graham cleared his throat and turned back to the presentation screen. As I was saying, the global expansion is going to position us as a dominant force in the industry. We're talking about operations in 12 new countries, partnerships with 6 major corporations, and projected revenue growth of 40% over the next 3 years. One of the board members, an older man with silver hair and a skeptical expression, leaned forward. And the risk assessment? Minimal, Graham said smoothly. We've done our homework. The markets are stable. The partnerships are solid. This is a smart move. Smart? Miles interjected with a grin. It's brilliant. This is going to make us untouchable. Another board member, a woman in her 50s, frowned. What about the financial projections? We're leveraging a significant amount of debt for this. If the expansion doesn't perform as expected, it will, Graham interrupted. Trust me. The woman didn't look convinced. Graham clicked to the next slide. Now, I know some of you have concerns, but I want to remind you that I've been running this company for 5 years, and in that time we've tripled our market value. I know what I'm doing. Nia watched him. The confidence, the arrogance, the absolute certainty that he was untouchable. She waited. Graham talked for another 10 minutes, fielding questions, brushing off concerns, painting a picture of inevitable success. And then he made a mistake. He looked at Nia. Of course, he said with a condescending smile, some people in this room might not understand the complexities of what we're doing, but that's okay. Not everyone needs to. A few board members glanced at Nia. She didn't react. Graham's smile widened. Actually, Nia, since you're here, do you have any questions? Any concerns? The room went silent. Nia met his eyes, and then slowly she stood. The silence that followed was absolute. Nia stood at the end of the boardroom table, her hands resting lightly on the back of the leather chair, her posture straight and composed. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room locked onto her. Graham's gaze sharp with irritation, Claire's wide with false concern, Miles's narrowed with amusement, Evelyn's cold with disapproval. She didn't speak immediately. She let the silence stretch, let it grow heavy and uncomfortable, let Graham's smirk start to falter at the edges. Actually, she said finally, her voice calm and clear, I do have a question. Graham's eyebrows rose. By all means. Nia reached into the slim leather portfolio she'd brought with her and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She set it on the table in front of her, smoothing it with her palm. This global expansion, she said, looking directly at Graham, You mentioned that the risk assessment is minimal, but I'm looking at the financial projections, and I'm seeing a $40 million leverage against assets that are currently valued at $32 million. If the expansion underperforms even slightly, the company could be facing a liquidity crisis within 18 months. The room went still. One of the board members, the silver-haired man who'd asked about risk earlier, leaned forward, his expression suddenly very interested. "Where did you get those numbers?" Nia kept her eyes on Graham. "From the internal audit that was completed last month, the one that wasn't included in today's presentation." Graham's jaw tightened. "That audit is preliminary. It doesn't reflect the full picture." "Then perhaps you should have included it," Nia said evenly, "so the board could make an informed decision." A murmur rippled through the room. The woman in her 50s who'd questioned the projections earlier was now flipping through her own documents, frowning. Graham's smile had vanished completely. "Nia, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're misinterpreting the data. This is a complex financial strategy, and I understand complex financial strategies," Nia interrupted, her voice still calm, still controlled. "I have a degree in economics from Stanford. I graduated summa cum laude. I may not run a company, Graham, but I know how to read a balance sheet." The murmur grew louder. Graham's face flushed red. "This is hardly the time or place." "Actually," said the silver-haired board member, "I think Mrs. Dalton raises a valid point. I'd like to see that internal audit." "So would I," said the woman in her 50s. Another board member nodded. "If there's a discrepancy between the audit and the projections, we need to address it before we vote on this expansion." Graham's hands curled into fists at his sides. He looked at Nia with something close to hatred, and for a moment she thought he might actually lose control right there in front of everyone. But then he took a breath, forced his expression back into something resembling professionalism, and turned to address the board. "Fine," he said tightly. "We can review the audit. But I want to make something very clear. This expansion is happening. With or without your approval, I will find a way to make it happen. Because unlike some people in this room, I'm not afraid to take risks. I'm not afraid to push this company into the future, even if it makes certain individuals uncomfortable." He looked directly at Nia when he said it. She didn't flinch. The meeting continued for another hour, tense and fractious, with Graham deflecting questions and the board members growing increasingly skeptical. By the time they finally called for a recess, the atmosphere in the room was poisonous. Nia gathered her portfolio and stood to leave. She'd made it halfway to the door when Graham caught up with her, his hand closing around her upper arm with enough force to make her stop. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, his face inches from hers. Nia looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. "Let go of me." "You made me look like a fool in there." "You made yourself look like a fool," she said quietly. "I just asked a question." His grip tightened. "You humiliated me, in front of the board, in front of my mother, in front of everyone who matters." "Then maybe you should have told the truth in your presentation." Graham's eyes blazed. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can walk in here with your fancy degree and your little facts and make me look bad?" "I think," Nia said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "that you should remove your hand from my arm before I make you regret it." For a moment, Graham looked like he might actually hit her. His jaw worked, his breathing harsh, his entire body vibrating with barely contained rage. Then Claire appeared at his elbow, her hand on his shoulder, her voice soft and soothing. "Graham," she said gently, "the board members are watching." He looked past Nia and saw that it was true. 3 board members stood near the coffee station, their conversation paused, their attention focused on Graham and Nia. Graham released her arm and stepped back, his expression smoothing into something almost pleasant. "We'll discuss this at home," he said, loud enough for the board members to hear. Then, quieter, just for her. "And you're going to regret this." Nia walked out without another word. She didn't go home. Instead, she drove to a coffee shop in the Mission District, a small place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, the kind of place where no one from Graham's world would ever think to look for her. She ordered a black coffee and sat in the back corner, her hands wrapped around the warm cup, her mind racing. She'd crossed a line today. She knew that. Graham would retaliate, he always did. But for the first time in 3 years, she didn't care. because she'd seen the look on his face when she'd challenged him. She'd seen the flash of panic beneath the anger. She'd seen him realize, just for a second, that she wasn't the silent, broken woman he thought she was. And it had felt extraordinary. Her phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen. Graham. You're making a huge mistake. She deleted the message without responding. Another buzz. Claire. Are you okay? That was intense. Call me if you need to talk. Nia stared at the message for a long moment. Claire. Sweet, concerned Claire. Who'd stood by Graham's side through the entire meeting, who'd touched his shoulder and calmed him down and probably spent the last hour reassuring him that Nia was the problem, not him. She deleted that message too. A third buzz. Unknown number. Impressive performance today. Didn't know you had it in you. Nia frowned. She didn't recognize the number. She was about to delete it when another message came through. Unknown. Number. This is Marcus Chen. I'm on the board. We should talk. Nia's heart skipped. Marcus Chen was the silver-haired man who'd asked about the risk assessment. He was also one of the most influential board members, a venture capitalist with a reputation for backing winners and cutting loose anyone who threatened his investments. She typed back, About what? The response came immediately. Marcus. About what happens next? Coffee tomorrow? I know a place in Palo Alto. Quiet, discreet. Nia hesitated. Meeting with a board member without Graham's knowledge was dangerous. If he found out, he'd see it as a betrayal. Another reason to punish her. But then again, she was already past the point of no return. Nia, send me the address. Chieb. She finally went home around 8 that evening. The house was dark except for the lights in Graham's office. She could see his silhouette through the frosted glass door, pacing back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. She went upstairs without announcing herself. The bedroom was empty, untouched. She changed into comfortable clothes, leggings, and an oversized sweater, and was about to settle in with a book when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Graham appeared in the doorway, still in his suit, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. We need to talk, he said. I'm tired. I don't care. He walked into the room and closed the door behind him. You crossed a line today. Nia set her book aside. I asked a legitimate question. You undermined me. In front of the board. In front of my family. I pointed out a flaw in your presentation. You made me look incompetent. His voice rose, echoing off the high ceilings. Do you have any idea what you've done? The board is questioning me now. They're doubting the expansion. They're doubting my leadership. All because you decided to play corporate warrior for a day. Nia stood, crossing her arms. Maybe they should question you. Maybe you're not as infallible as you think you are. Graham stared at her like she'd grown a second head. What did you just say? You heard me. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You've lost your mind. You've actually lost your mind. No, Nia said quietly. I found it. Graham's expression darkened. He took a step toward her, then another, until he was close enough that she could smell the scotch on his breath. You think you're clever, he said softly. You think you're strong, but you're not. You're nothing, Nia. You're a charity case I took in because I felt sorry for you, and the only reason you're still here is because I allow it. The words should have hurt. A year ago, they would have destroyed her, but now they just bounced off like rain on glass. If that's what you need to believe, she said, then believe it. Graham's hand shot out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. Don't you dare dismiss me. Nia didn't pull away. She just stared into his eyes, her expression calm, and said, Take your hand off me. Or what? Or I'll make sure the board sees the emails. His grip loosened slightly. What emails? The ones between you and Vera. The ones where you discuss using company funds for personal expenses. The ones where you talk about manipulating quarterly reports to inflate stock prices. She paused. Should I go on? Graham released her and stepped back, his face pale. You're bluffing. Am I? They stared at each other in the dim bedroom light, the air between them crackling with tension. Finally, Graham turned and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob, not looking back. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. I promise you that. Then he left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more threatening than if he'd slammed it. Nia stood alone in the bedroom, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. She'd done it. She'd actually stood up to him. And now there was no going back. The next morning, Nia drove to Palo Alto. Marcus Chen had chosen a small cafe near Stanford's campus, tucked away on a quiet side street. It was the kind of place where graduate students hunched over laptops and professors graded papers, anonymous and unremarkable. Perfect for a conversation that needed to stay secret. Marcus was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with a view of the door. He stood when he saw her, extending a hand. "Mrs. Dalton, thank you for meeting me." Nia shook his hand. His grip was firm, professional. "Thank you for the invitation." They sat. A waiter appeared, took their orders, black coffee for both of them, and disappeared again. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You surprised me yesterday." "I surprised a lot of people." "Graham especially." Marcus smiled slightly. "I've known him since he took over the company. Cocky kid, thinks he's smarter than everyone else. But you," he tilted his head, "you actually are smarter than he is." Nia didn't respond. "I did some research last night," Marcus continued. "Stanford, summa cum laude, thesis on emerging market economics. You could have worked anywhere, investment banks, consulting firms. Instead, you ended up married to Graham Dalton, playing housewife." He paused. "Why?" "That's personal." "Fair enough." Marcus took a sip of his coffee. "Let me ask you something else then. Yesterday, when you challenged Graham's projections, was that just you being thorough, or was it strategic?" Nia met his gaze. "What do you think?" "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that you're not the person everyone believes you are. I think you've been watching, waiting, learning, and I think yesterday was the first move in a much larger game." Nia's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "That's quite an assumption." "Is it?" Marcus leaned forward. "Because here's what I know. Graham's expansion plan is reckless. It's going to put the company at serious risk, and half the board knows it, but they're too afraid to challenge him because he's a Dalton, because his family built this company, because crossing him means making an enemy." He paused. "But you're not afraid of him anymore, are you?" Nia didn't answer. Marcus smiled. "I'm not asking you to confirm or deny anything. I'm just saying that if someone were planning to make a move against Graham, now would be the time. The board is already questioning him. The expansion vote is next week, and if the right person had the right leverage—" He shrugged. "Well, things could change very quickly." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've been on this board for 8 years, Marcus said bluntly. "And in that time, I've watched Graham make increasingly reckless decisions. He's arrogant, he's impulsive, and he's going to destroy this company if someone doesn't stop him." He paused. "I've tried. Other board members have tried. But he doesn't listen to us. He thinks we're old and scared and irrelevant. And you think he'll listen to me?" "No." Marcus's smile widened. "I think you're going to replace him." The words hung in the air between them. Nia's mind raced. Marcus Chen wasn't just a board member. He was a power broker, the kind of man who could make or break careers with a single phone call. And he was sitting across from her, essentially offering her an alliance. But alliances came with prices. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "I want the company to survive," Marcus said. "And I want to back someone who actually knows what they're doing. Someone smart, someone strategic, someone who won't burn everything to the ground for the sake of their own ego." "And you think that's me?" "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that you're an unknown variable, which makes you either very dangerous or very valuable. I'm betting on valuable." Nia picked up her coffee, taking a slow sip while she considered her options. Trusting Marcus was risky. He could be playing his own game, using her as a pawn to consolidate his own power. But refusing his help was riskier, because the truth was, she couldn't do this alone. "If I were to consider making a move," she said slowly, "hypothetically speaking, what would that look like?" Marcus's eyes gleamed. "First, you'd need leverage, something that gives you unquestionable authority, something Graham can't fight or negotiate away." "Like what?" "Like majority ownership." Nia's heart stopped. Marcus watched her carefully. I know Graham controls the majority of shares, inherited from his father, but inheritance is tricky. Family businesses are complicated, and sometimes, he trailed off meaningfully, sometimes shares end up in unexpected places. Nia's hands tightened around her coffee cup. Marcus leaned back, his expression casual. Of course, if someone did happen to have controlling interest in the company, they'd need to be strategic about revealing it. Timing would be everything, too soon, and Graham would have time to mount a defense. Too late, and the board might lose confidence entirely. He paused. But if it happened at exactly the right moment, say, during a critical board meeting where Graham's judgment was already being questioned, well, that would be devastating. Nia's mind was racing. Marcus didn't know about her shares. He couldn't. She'd been too careful, but he clearly suspected something. He was fishing, testing her, trying to see if she'd confirm his suspicions. She needed to be careful. That's an interesting theory, she said neutrally. Marcus smiled. Isn't it? He finished his coffee and stood. Well, I should get going, but Mrs. Dalton, Nia, if you ever need someone in your corner, someone who understands how the board works, someone who can help you navigate the politics. He pulled a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table. My personal number. Use it if you need it. Nia took the card. Thank you. No, Marcus said quietly. Thank you. Yesterday was the most interesting board meeting we've had in years. I'm very much looking forward to the next one. Nia drove home in a daze. Marcus Chen's words echoed in her head, mixing with her own thoughts, her own plans, her own fears. She'd been so focused on the moment of revelation, on the act of finally showing Graham who she really was, that she hadn't thought much about what came after. But Marcus was right. Timing was everything. She couldn't just walk into a board meeting and announce that she owned the company. She needed the board to already be questioning Graham. She needed them to be desperate for an alternative. She needed them to see her not as Graham's wife, but as their salvation, which meant she needed to make things worse for Graham before she made them better for herself. She was so lost in thought that she almost didn't notice the car parked in her driveway when she got home. A silver Mercedes. Familiar. Evelyn. Nia's stomach sank. She considered turning around, driving away, avoiding this confrontation entirely, but that would only delay the inevitable. She parked and went inside. Evelyn was in the living room, sitting on the white leather sofa with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like she was posing for a portrait, elegant, untouchable, absolutely in control. There you are, Evelyn said pleasantly. I was beginning to think you'd left town. Nia set her purse on the entry table. I had a meeting. Evelyn's eyes were sharp. Anything important? Just coffee. With? A friend. Evelyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You don't have friends, darling. You have people who tolerate you because you're married to my son. Nia walked into the living room but didn't sit. Did you need something, Evelyn? I wanted to talk to you about yesterday. The board meeting. Yes. Evelyn's voice was cool, measured. You humiliated Graham in front of very important people, people whose opinions matter, people who determine the future of this company and this family. I asked a question about the financial projections. You challenged his authority, Evelyn corrected. You made him look incompetent, and worse, you made our family look divided. She stood, smoothing her skirt. Do you understand what that does to our reputation, to our standing in this community? I understand that Graham was presenting misleading information to the board, and someone needed to point it out. Evelyn's expression hardened. You think you're helping. You think you're being clever. All you're doing is embarrassing yourself. The board members don't respect you. They pity you. They see you as Graham's little pet project, trying desperately to prove she belongs. The words were designed to cut, to wound, to make Nia doubt herself. They didn't work. If that's what they think, Nia said calmly, they're wrong. Evelyn studied her for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. You've changed. Yes. Why? Nia almost laughed, because how could she explain it? How could she tell Evelyn that she'd spent 3 years being erased, being diminished, being treated like she was worth less than the furniture, until one day she'd looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself? How could she explain that the moment Graham had spit on her in front of all those people, something inside her had finally, irrevocably broken? Not in a way that destroyed her, but in a way that set her free? Because I got tired, Nia said simply. Tired of what? Of being invisible. Evelyn's laugh was sharp and brittle. Oh, darling, you were never invisible. You were just insignificant. There's a difference. Nia walked to the door and opened it. I think you should leave now. Evelyn didn't move. You're making a mistake, Nia, a very serious mistake. If you continue down this path, if you keep challenging Graham, keep undermining him, keep pretending you're something you're not. She paused. There will be consequences. I'm aware. Are you? Evelyn picked up her purse, a sleek designer bag that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Because I don't think you understand what you're up against. Graham is a Dalton. This company is his birthright. And you? She looked Nia up and down with thinly veiled contempt. You're a janitor's daughter who got lucky. Don't mistake luck for power. She walked to the door, pausing just before she left. When this all falls apart, Evelyn said quietly, and it will, don't come crying to me for help. You've made your choice. Now you'll live with it. She left without waiting for a response. Nia stood in the doorway for a long time after Evelyn's car disappeared down the driveway, her heart pounding, her hands trembling with adrenaline. A janitor's daughter who got lucky. That's all they saw. That's all they'd ever seen. But soon, very soon, they were going to see something very different. Nia closed the door and went upstairs to her bedroom. She pulled out her lockbox, opened it, and removed the folder containing all her documentation, every stock certificate, every transfer record, every piece of evidence that proved what she owned. She spread it all out on the bed, staring at it like a general reviewing battle plans. The board meeting was in 5 days. Graham would present his expansion plan again, probably with adjustments designed to address the concerns she'd raised. He'd be prepared for her this time. He'd try to shut her down before she could say anything, but he wouldn't be prepared for the truth. Nia began organizing the documents, creating a presentation of her own, clear, irrefutable, devastating. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, barely noticing when the sun set and the house grew dark around her. She was so focused that she didn't hear Graham come home, didn't hear him moving around downstairs, didn't hear anything until he appeared in the bedroom doorway. What are you doing? Nia looked up. Graham stood there in his suit, his tie already loosened, a drink in his hand. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight. Working, she said simply. He stepped into the room, his gaze falling on the papers spread across the bed. Working on what? Research. For? Myself. Graham's eyes narrowed. He crossed to the bed and started to reach for one of the documents. Nia's hand shot out, covering the papers. Don't. Their eyes met. These are private, she said quietly. Nothing in this house is private from me. These are. Graham stared at her, his expression oscillating between anger and something that looked almost like uncertainty. Finally, he stepped back. I don't know what game you're playing, he said slowly, but it needs to stop, now, before you do something you can't take back. Nia began gathering the papers, methodically returning them to her folder. I'm not playing a game, Graham. Then what do you call what happened yesterday? I call it honesty. Graham laughed, sharp and bitter. Honesty, right. You stood up in front of the board and tried to make me look like a fool, and you call that honesty. I called out misleading projections. That's not an attack, that's accountability. You have no right to hold me accountable for anything. Nia looked up at him, her hand still on the folder. Why not? Because you're my wife, not my colleague. You're not on the board, you're not a shareholder. You're nothing but what? Nia stood, the folder clutched to her chest. Say it, Graham. Finish the sentence. His jaw worked. Nothing but someone who should know her place. The word settled between them, heavy and final. Nia walked to the closet and put the folder back in its lockbox, her movement slow and deliberate. When she turned back to Graham, her expression was calm. In 5 days, she said quietly, everyone is going to know exactly what my place is. Graham's eyes flashed. Is that a threat? No, it's a promise. He drained his drink and set the glass down hard on the dresser. You're going to regret this, Nia. I've been patient with you. I've tried to be understanding. But if you keep pushing me, if you keep trying to embarrass me, I will make your life a living hell. You already have, Nia said softly. For 3 years you've made my life hell. You've belittled me, humiliated me, cheated on me, made me feel like I was worth nothing. And I took it, Graham. I took all of it. Because I thought... She paused, her voice catching. I thought if I just loved you enough, if I was good enough, if I was quiet enough, you'd see me. Really see me. Graham said nothing. But you never did, Nia continued. You never saw me as anything more than an accessory, something pretty to hang on your arm at fundraisers, something you could control, something you could discard when it stopped being useful. That's not... Yes, it is. Nia's voice was steady now, clear. And I'm done. I'm done being invisible. I'm done being insignificant. I'm done being nothing. Graham stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked to the door. Fine, he said without looking back. Be something. See how far that gets you. He left. Nia stood alone in the bedroom, her heart racing, her whole body trembling with the weight of what she'd just said. 5 days. In 5 days, everything would change, and there would be no going back. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. Nia moved through the house like a ghost, crossing paths with Graham only in passing. He left early each morning and came home late, usually smelling of scotch and expensive cologne that wasn't hers. When they did see each other, in the kitchen, in the hallway, across the vast emptiness of their bedroom, they didn't speak. They just looked at each other with the wary acknowledgement of two people who knew a war was coming but hadn't yet fired the first shot. On the second day, Claire called. I've been worried about you, Claire said, her voice dripping with concern. You haven't answered any of my texts. Are you okay? Nia was standing in the library looking out at the bay. The water was gray and choppy, reflecting the overcast sky. I'm fine. You don't sound fine. You sound distant. I've had a lot on my mind. Because of the board meeting? Claire's tone shifted, becoming carefully casual. Graham mentioned you've been stressed. He's worried about you, Nia. We all are. Nia closed her eyes. Of course Graham had talked to Claire. Of course he'd painted himself as the concerned husband, worried about his unstable wife. It was exactly what she'd expected. I appreciate the concern, Nia said evenly, but I'm fine. Really. Are you sure? Because if you need someone to talk to, I don't. There was a pause. When Claire spoke again, her voice had an edge to it. You're being very cold, Nia. I'm trying to help you. No, you're not. The words came out before Nia could stop them. You're trying to get information for Graham. You're trying to figure out what I'm planning so you can run back and tell him everything I said. Claire's breath caught. That's not... How could you think... I'm your friend, Nia. I've always been your friend. No, Nia said quietly. You've been Graham's friend. There's a difference. She hung up before Claire could respond. Her hands were shaking. She'd burned that bridge and she knew it. But the truth was, the bridge had been rotten for years. She'd just finally stopped pretending it was solid. On the third day, Miles showed up at the house. Nia found him in the living room, sprawled on the sofa like he owned the place, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when she entered, a lazy grin spreading across his face. Well, well, the woman of the hour. Nia stopped in the doorway. What are you doing here? Graham asked me to check on you. Miles set his phone down and stood, stretching. He's concerned, says you've been acting strange. I'm fine. That's what everyone keeps saying. Miles walked toward her, his hands in his pockets. But you know what's funny? You don't look fine. You look different, harder, maybe, like you're planning something. Nia held his gaze. And if I am? Miles laughed, genuinely delighted. Oh, this is good. This is really good. What are you planning, Nia? Some kind of revenge? You going to embarrass Graham again? Make him look bad in front of the board? He stepped closer, his smile widening. Because let me tell you something, it won't work. Graham's a Dalton. We're bulletproof. You? You're just the help who got lucky. The words echoed Evelyn's from days before, and they still didn't sting the way Miles clearly wanted them to. Is that what you think? Nia asked calmly. It's what everyone thinks. Miles tilted his head, studying her. You know, for a while I thought you might actually have some backbone. The way you stood up in that meeting, the way you challenged Graham, I thought of, hey, maybe she's not as pathetic as she looks. But then I realized something. What's that? You're desperate. Miles's smile turned cruel. You know Graham's cheating on you. You know he doesn't love you. You know you're about 5 seconds away from being replaced by someone younger and prettier and less annoying. So you're lashing out, making a scene, trying to feel important before you get thrown out like yesterday's trash. Nia's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed level. You should leave. Why? Does the truth hurt? No. Because you're trespassing, and if you don't leave in the next 30 seconds, I'm calling security. Miles's grin faltered. This is my brother's house. Actually, Nia said quietly, it's mine. My name is on the deed. Graham signed it over 3 years ago as a wedding gift. So technically, you're standing in my house without permission, which makes you a trespasser. Miles stared at her, clearly trying to determine if she was bluffing. She wasn't. Graham had signed the house over to her during their first year of marriage, back when he was still performing grand romantic gestures designed to make her feel special. He'd probably forgotten about it by now. But Nia hadn't. Miles must have seen something in her expression that convinced him she was serious, because his smile disappeared. Fine, I'll leave, but Nia? He paused at the door. When this all blows up in your face, and it will, don't expect any of us to feel sorry for you. He left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Nia stood alone in the living room, her heart pounding. 2 days left. She spent the rest of that afternoon finalizing her presentation. Every stock certificate was photocopied and organized chronologically. Every transfer document was highlighted and annotated. Every piece of evidence was arranged to tell a single, irrefutable story. Nia Dalton owned 90% of Dalton Industries, and she had for 3 years. She practiced what she was going to say, standing in front of the mirror in her bathroom, watching her own face as she spoke the words that would detonate Graham's world. She tried on different tones, calm and professional, cold and clinical, quiet and devastating. In the end, she settled on simple honesty. No theatrics, no gloating, just the facts, delivered clearly and without apology, because the facts were damning enough. On the 4th day, the day before the board meeting, Graham came home early. Nia was in the kitchen, making coffee, when he walked in. He looked exhausted. His suit was rumpled, his tie missing, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. We need to talk, he said. Nia poured her coffee. Okay. Graham pulled out a chair and sat down heavily at the kitchen island. For a long moment, he just stared at his hands. I spoke to Marcus Chen today, he said finally. Nia's pulse jumped, but she kept her face neutral. And? He told me he met with you for coffee. He did. Graham looked up, his eyes bloodshot and weary. Why? He wanted to talk about the company. About me, you mean? He wanted to talk about me. Nia took a sip of her coffee. That came up. Graham laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jesus Christ, Nia, you're actually doing this. You're actually trying to turn the board against me. I'm not trying to turn anyone against you, Graham. I'm just telling the truth. Your truth, he shot back, your version of events, which is biased and bitter and completely unfair. Is it unfair to point out that your expansion plan is financially reckless? Yes, because you don't understand the full picture. You don't understand the strategy, the long-term vision, I understand that you're leveraging more money than the company can afford to lose, Nia interrupted, her voice calm. I understand that if this expansion fails, Dalton Industries will be bankrupt within 2 years, and I understand that you don't care, because you're so desperate to prove that you're as good as your father that you're willing to risk everything. Graham's face went white. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Nia set her coffee down. Your father built this company from nothing. He was brilliant and strategic and careful. And you've spent your entire life trying to live up to that legacy, trying to prove that you're just as smart, just as capable. But you're not, Graham. You're impulsive and arrogant and so convinced of your own genius that you can't see when you're making a mistake. Get out. Nia blinked. What? Get out of my house. Graham stood, his hands gripping the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles went white. Pack your things and leave. Right now. This is my house too. I don't care. I want you gone. Tonight. Nia stared at him, her mind racing. This was it. The moment she'd been preparing for. The moment when Graham finally pushed her too far and gave her the justification she needed to destroy him. But instead of satisfaction, she felt something unexpected. Sadness. Because despite everything he'd done to her, despite all the cruelty and the betrayal and the humiliation, there was a part of her that had loved him once, that had believed in the man he pretended to be. That part of her mourned what they could have been, if he'd been different, if they'd both been different. No, she said quietly. Graham's head snapped up. What did you say? I said no, I'm not leaving. Nia, you can't make me leave, Graham. This house is in my name. You gave it to me, remember? 3 years ago, when you still pretended to love me. She picked up her coffee and started toward the door, then paused. But if you want to leave, you're welcome to. I hear Claire has a lovely guest room. She walked out, leaving Graham standing alone in the kitchen, his face twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. That night, Nia barely slept. She lay in the massive bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind churning through everything that could go wrong tomorrow. What if the board didn't believe her? What if Graham had some trick up his sleeve, some way to discredit her evidence? What if she'd miscalculated and this whole plan was about to blow up in her face? But then she thought about her father. He'd worked for Graham's father for 30 years, mopping floors and emptying trash cans, invisible to everyone who mattered. He'd never complained, never demanded recognition. He'd just shown up every day and done his job with quiet dignity, knowing that his labor kept the building running even if no one acknowledged it. And when the company had been struggling, when Graham's father had been desperate for capital, her father had taken a risk. He'd bought shares, not because he thought he'd get rich, but because he believed in supporting the place that gave him work. He'd never lived to see those shares become valuable, never lived to see the company grow into a billion-dollar enterprise, never lived to see his daughter inherit the power he'd accidentally accumulated. But he would have been proud. Nia was sure of that. He would have been proud that she'd survived, that she'd endured, that she'd waited for exactly the right moment to reveal the truth, and tomorrow she would make him proud again. She got out of bed around 3 in the morning and went to the library. She pulled out her folder one more time, checking every document, every signature, every detail. Everything was in order. Everything was perfect. She was ready. Dawn broke gray and cold over San Francisco. Nia showered and dressed with meticulous care. She chose a navy suit, sharply tailored, expensive but not flashy. Simple jewelry, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a low bun. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the quiet, diminished version of herself, who'd spent 3 years fading into the background. In her place was someone harder, stronger, someone who knew exactly what she was worth. Graham was already gone when she came downstairs. He hadn't come to bed last night. She'd heard him moving around in one of the guest rooms, pacing, probably drinking. Good. Let him be off balance. Let him be unsure. It would make what was about to happen that much more devastating. Nia drove to Dalton Industries headquarters alone, her folder secured in a slim leather briefcase. The building was a gleaming tower of glass and steel in the financial district, 30 stories of architectural ambition designed to announce to the world that Dalton Industries mattered. She parked in the underground garage and took the elevator to the 30th floor, where the executive offices and boardroom were located. The receptionist looked surprised to see her. Mrs. Dalton, I didn't realize you'd be attending today's meeting. Neither did anyone else, Nia said pleasantly. But I'll be there. She walked past the reception desk before the woman could respond, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The boardroom doors were closed, but she could hear voices inside. She checked her watch. 8:55. The meeting started at 9. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and pushed open the doors. 12 board members were already seated around the massive table, most of them holding coffee cups and chatting in low voices. The conversation died the moment Nia entered. Graham stood at the head of the table, mid-sentence, a presentation remote in his hand. He stared at her, his expression shifting from surprise to anger to something that looked almost like panic. "Nia, what are you doing here?" "Attending the meeting," she said calmly. She walked to an empty chair near the middle of the table and sat down, setting her briefcase on the table in front of her. "This is a closed meeting, board members only. I'm aware." "Then you need to leave." Nia met his eyes. "No, Graham, I don't." The board members exchanged glances. Marcus Chen was watching her with barely concealed interest, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Claire was there too, sitting to Graham's right, her face pale. She looked at Nia like she was seeing a stranger. Evelyn sat near the end of the table, her expression icy with disapproval. Miles leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, clearly enjoying the tension. Graham's jaw tightened. "Nia, I'm asking you nicely. Leave, now, before you embarrass yourself." "I think," said Marcus Chen, speaking for the first time, "we should hear what Mrs. Dalton has to say." Graham spun toward him. "This is a board meeting, Marcus. She's not on the board." "Maybe we should let her speak anyway." This came from the woman in her 50s who'd questioned Graham's projections at the last meeting. Her name was Patricia Vance, and she looked genuinely curious. "After all, Mrs. Dalton raised some valid concerns last time. I'd like to hear if she has more." Several other board members murmured agreement. Graham's face flushed red. "This is ridiculous. She has no standing here, no authority, no—" "Actually," Nia said quietly, opening her briefcase, "I have more standing than anyone in this room." The murmurs stopped. Nia pulled out her folder and set it on the table. Then she stood, slowly and deliberately, and looked around at each board member in turn. "My name is Nia Dalton," she said, her voice steady and clear. "And I own 90% of this company." The silence that followed was absolute. Graham laughed. It was a sharp, disbelieving sound. "That's insane. You don't own anything." Nia opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "This is a stock certificate issued to Marcus Dalton Sr. in 1994, when the company was first incorporated. It represents a 15% stake in Dalton Industries." She slid it across the table toward Patricia Vance, who picked it up and examined it carefully. "That certificate was sold to my father, Raymond Chen, in 1995 for $20,000. My father was a janitor here. He worked night shifts for 30 years. Nia pulled out another document. "This is the transfer record, signed by both parties and notarized." Patricia passed the documents to the board member next to her. Graham's smile had vanished. "That's impossible. My father would never eat—" "Your father was desperate for capital," Nia continued, her voice calm and relentless. "The company was struggling. He needed cash to keep operations running. My father offered to help." She pulled out another stack of papers. "Over the next 5 years, there were 3 stock splits. Each time, my father's shares multiplied. By 2000, he owned 45% of the company." The documents were being passed around the table now, board members examining them with increasing attention. "In 2010, there was a major restructuring," Nia said. "Marcus Dalton Sr. died, and his shares were distributed among his heirs. Graham received 30%, Evelyn received 15%, Miles received 10%. The remaining shares were held by outside investors, most of whom sold to my father over the next decade at fair market prices." Graham was white as paper. "This is a lie. You forged these documents." "They're not forged," Marcus Chen said quietly. He was holding one of the stock certificates, examining it closely. "I've seen enough of these to know. This is legitimate." Evelyn stood abruptly. "This is absurd. If what you're saying is true, we would have known. There would have been disclosures, filings with the SEC." "There were," Nia said. "Filed under my father's name and later under the name of the trust I established after his death. Everything was done legally and properly. You just never looked." Patricia Vance was flipping through the documents now, her expression growing more serious with each page. "These transfer records are signed and notarized. The dates match the company's corporate filings. This appears to be—" She looked up at Nia. "This appears to be legitimate. Graham slammed his hand on the table. No, no, this is... Someone check these, verify them. This is clearly some kind of fraud. I already did, Marcus said. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. I had my legal team run preliminary checks after our coffee meeting, Mrs. Dalton, just in case you were exactly who I thought you were. He looked up at Graham. It's all legitimate. She owns 90% of Dalton Industries. The room erupted. Board members were talking over each other, demanding to see the documents, asking questions, some standing, some still seated but leaning forward with intense focus. Through it all, Naya stood perfectly still, watching Graham. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His face was ashen, his hands trembling, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He stared at her like she was a ghost, like she couldn't possibly be real. You... He could barely get the word out. You've known this entire time? Yes. For how long? 3 years. Claire made a small, strangled sound. Evelyn had sat back down, her perfect composure finally cracking. She looked at Nia with something that might have been respect and might have been hatred. It was hard to tell. Miles was grinning, but it was the grin of someone watching a car crash, horrified and delighted at the same time. Why? Graham's voice broke. Why didn't you tell me? Nia looked at him across the length of the boardroom table. This man she'd married, this man she'd loved, this man who'd spent 3 years systematically destroying her sense of self-worth. Because I wanted to see who you really were, she said quietly. I wanted to see if you'd treat me differently if you knew, if you'd respect me, love me, value me. She paused. But you wouldn't have, would you? Even if you'd known I owned the company, you still would have spit on me that night at dinner. You still would have called me an embarrassment. You still would have cheated with Vera and dismissed my concerns and treated me like I was nothing. Graham opened his mouth, then closed it, because they both knew she was right. Patricia Vance cleared her throat. Mrs. Dalton, as the majority shareholder, you have the authority to make significant decisions regarding company leadership and direction. She paused. What exactly do you intend to do? Nia pulled out one final document from her folder. I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Graham Dalton as CEO, effective today. The room went silent again. Graham's face twisted with rage and desperation. You can't do this. I can, Nia said. And I am. The board won't. They can't just... Actually, Marcus interrupted, as majority shareholder, Mrs. Dalton doesn't need board approval. She can make this decision unilaterally. We're here as a courtesy. Graham turned on him. You knew. You knew this whole time and you didn't tell me. I suspected, Marcus corrected. I didn't know for certain until today. But yes, I encouraged Mrs. Dalton to make her move now during this meeting when your judgment was already being questioned. He smiled thinly. It seemed like the most efficient approach. Graham looked around the table wildly, searching for allies. His eyes landed on Claire. Claire, you can't let her do this. We've been friends for... Claire wouldn't meet his eyes. I'm sorry, Graham, she said quietly, but if she owns the company... Mom! Graham turned to Evelyn, his voice desperate now. Mom, do something. Call our lawyers. This can't be legal. There has to be something. Evelyn looked at her son for a long moment. Then she stood, gathered her things, and walked toward the door. Mom! Graham's voice cracked. Where are you going? Evelyn paused at the door and looked back. I'm going home, Graham, where I suggest you do the same. Her eyes flickered to Nia. It appears we've all been outplayed. She left. Miles let out a low whistle. Well, this is the best board meeting I've ever attended. Graham rounded on him. You think this is funny? I think it's spectacular. Miles stood, still grinning. I mean, come on, Graham. You spent 3 years treating her like garbage, and she spent 3 years quietly owning the company you thought was yours. That's not just revenge. That's art. He walked toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Nia, I actually respect you now, which is more than I can say for my brother. He left too. One by one, the other board members stood and filed out, some offering Nia quiet congratulations, others just looking shell-shocked. Marcus Chen was the last to leave, and he stopped beside her chair. Well played, Mrs. Dalton, he said quietly. If you need advice on selecting a new CEO, I'd be happy to help. Thank you, Marcus. I'll be in touch. He nodded and left. And then it was just Nia, Graham, and Claire in the enormous boardroom. Claire stood slowly, her face pale, her hands shaking. She looked at Nia like she was seeing her for the first time. "You played me," Claire said, her voice barely a whisper. "This whole time you knew exactly what you were doing, and you let me—" "Let you what?" Nia asked calmly. "Pretend to be my friend while reporting everything I said back to Graham? Let you comfort me while sleeping with my husband's best interests ahead of my own? Let you play both sides while thinking you were so much smarter than me?" Claire's eyes widened. I didn't." "Yes, you did." Nia's voice was soft but unyielding. "And now you know exactly what it feels like to be underestimated." Claire's composure finally shattered. Tears welled in her eyes, and she grabbed her bag and fled from the room, leaving only Graham. He stood at the head of the empty table, staring at nothing, his chest rising and falling with sharp, uneven breaths. 3 years, he said finally, his voice hoarse. "You lived in my house, slept in my bed, sat at my table, and you never said a word." "No," Nia agreed. "I didn't." "Why?" He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his eyes that looked like genuine pain. "If you hated me that much, why didn't you just leave?" Nia stood and began gathering her documents, carefully returning them to her folder. "Because leaving wouldn't have changed anything, Graham. You would have moved on to the next woman, treated her the same way you treated me, and learned nothing." She closed her briefcase. "But this might actually teach you something." "Teach me what?" She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at him one last time. "That quiet doesn't mean weak," she said softly. "And invisible doesn't mean powerless." Then she walked out, leaving Graham Dalton alone in the boardroom of the company he'd just lost. The elevator doors closed behind Nia with a soft chime, sealing her into the quiet, mirrored space. She watched her reflection multiply into infinity on all sides. One woman, then dozens, then hundreds, all standing perfectly still with a leather briefcase clutched in steady hands. She'd done it. The realization hit her all at once, stealing her breath. 3 years of silence, 3 years of planning, 3 years of enduring humiliation after humiliation. And in less than 30 minutes, she'd dismantled Graham's entire world. Her hands started to shake. She set the briefcase down and pressed her palms against the cool metal railing, breathing slowly, deliberately, forcing herself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to fall apart. This wasn't the time to cry or laugh or scream or do any of the 1,000 things her body was suddenly demanding she'd do. The elevator descended smoothly, floor numbers ticking down in glowing digits. 28, 27, 26. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket and saw a text from Marcus Chen. "Marcus. Masterclass. Truly. Let's talk next week about transition planning." She didn't respond. Not yet. She needed time to process what had just happened, to understand the full scope of what she'd set in motion. The elevator reached the ground floor, and the doors opened onto the building's massive marble lobby. Nia stepped out, her heels clicking on the polished stone, echoing in the cavernous space. A few employees glanced at her as she passed, but no one stopped her. No one questioned her presence. She was just another person in expensive clothes walking through an expensive building. They had no idea that everything had just changed. She made it to her car before the tears came. They hit her like a wave, sudden, overwhelming, unstoppable. She sat in the driver's seat with the door closed and the engine off, and she cried. Not delicate tears that could be wiped away with a tissue. Real, ugly, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and damaged, and finally free. She cried for the woman she'd been 3 years ago, walking down the aisle toward a man who'd promised her forever and meant it for about 6 months. She cried for every dinner party where she'd sat silent while Graham's friends made jokes at her expense. She cried for every night she'd lain awake wondering if she was going crazy, if the things she saw and felt were real or just paranoia. She cried for her father, who'd worked himself to exhaustion for a company that barely acknowledged he existed, who'd bought those shares not because he wanted power, but because he believed in contributing to something larger than himself. And she cried because despite everything, despite all the cruelty and betrayal and humiliation, there was still a small, stubborn part of her that mourned what could have been. The marriage she'd wanted, the partnership she'd believed in, the love that had turned out to be performance art. It took 20 minutes for the tears to stop. When they finally did, Nia pulled down the visor mirror and looked at herself. Her mascara had run, leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. Her eyes were red and swollen. She looked wrecked. She also looked alive. She cleaned her face with tissues from the glove compartment, fixed her makeup as best she could, and started the car. She didn't go home. Instead, she drove to Ocean Beach, parking in one of the nearly empty lots overlooking the gray expanse of the Pacific. It was a cold day, the kind of San Francisco morning where the fog hung low and heavy, turning the world soft and dreamlike. A few joggers passed by on the path, and a handful of surfers bobbed in the waves, but otherwise she was alone. Nia got out of the car and walked down to the sand. The wind whipped her hair loose from its careful bun, and the cold air bit through her expensive suit jacket, but she didn't care. She stood at the edge of the water, watching the waves crash and recede, endless and indifferent. Her phone buzzed again, and again, and again. She pulled it out and saw a flood of messages. Claire, we need to talk, please. Claire, I know you're angry, but this isn't fair. Claire, you made me look like a fool. Nia deleted them without reading past the previews. Miles, I meant what I said. That was impressive. Let me know if you need anything. She stared at that one for a long moment. Miles, of all people, offering support. It felt like a trap, or a joke, or both. She didn't respond. Evelyn, I underestimated you. That was a mistake I won't make again. We should talk when you're ready. Nia almost laughed. Evelyn's version of an apology. Clinical, calculated, entirely focused on protecting herself and her interests. And then, finally, the message she'd been both expecting and dreading. Graham, please come home. Graham, we need to talk about this. Graham, Nia, answer me. Graham, you can't just destroy everything and walk away. Graham, this isn't over. Nia turned off her phone and shoved it back into her pocket. She stood on the beach for over an hour, watching the ocean, letting the wind and cold numb her skin and clear her mind. When she finally felt steady enough to face what came next, she walked back to her car and drove home. The house was dark when she arrived, but Graham's car was in the driveway. Nia parked next to it and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she got out and went inside. She found Graham in his study, sitting in the leather chair behind his massive desk, a half-empty bottle of scotch on the table beside him. He looked up when she entered, his eyes bloodshot, his face haggard. You came back, he said, his voice rough. I live here. For now. Graham poured himself another drink, his hand unsteady. I assume you'll be kicking me out soon, since you own the house, since you own everything. Nia leaned against the doorframe, keeping distance between them. I haven't decided yet. Haven't decided? Graham laughed bitterly. You just destroyed my career, my reputation, my entire life. And you haven't decided if you're going to take my house too? It was never your house, Graham. You signed it over to me, remember? As a gift. Because I loved you. No, Nia said quietly. You gave it to me because it was a grand gesture that made you look generous. You loved the idea of yourself as a man who did big romantic things. But you never actually loved me. Graham drained his glass and poured another. That's not true. Isn't it? When did you stop pretending, Graham? Was it after the wedding? After the first year? Or did you never really start? He didn't answer. Nia pushed off the doorframe and walked further into the study. I want to understand something. Why did you marry me? Graham looked at her like she'd asked him to explain quantum physics. What? It's a simple question. Why did you marry me? Was I just convenient? A project? Someone you thought you could mold into the perfect corporate wife? I married you because... He stopped, his jaw working. Because you were different. You weren't like the women I usually dated. You weren't obsessed with money or status. You actually seemed to care about things that mattered. You worked for nonprofits, for God's sake. You talked about changing the world. And you found that attractive? I found it refreshing. Graham's voice was sharp with something that might have been regret. Everyone in my world is the same. Same schools, same clubs, same conversations. You were real, or at least I thought you were. I was real, Nia said. You're the one who was performing. Graham slammed his glass down on the desk. Don't you dare turn this around on me. You're the one who lied. You're the one who hid the fact that you owned my entire company. You sat there for 3 years, letting me think I was in control, letting me make decisions, letting you show me exactly who you are, Nia interrupted. Yes, I did. That's cruel. Is it? More cruel than spitting on me in front of 20 people? More cruel than sleeping with your assistant while I was home alone wondering what I'd done wrong? More cruel than telling me I was nothing but an embarrassment every single day for 3 years? Graham flinched. I never meant— Yes, you did. Nia's voice was steady, unyielding. You meant every word, every insult, every dismissal, every moment of contempt. You meant all of it, Graham. And the only reason you regret it now is because you finally understand that I had the power to fight back. He stared at her, his face working through a complicated series of emotions. Anger, shame, desperation, something that might have been genuine remorse. What happens now? He asked finally. Now you move out. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care. A hotel. Miles' place. Claire's guest room. Nia paused. Actually, Claire's guest room might be awkward, considering— Graham's eyes narrowed. Considering what? Considering that I'm going to be restructuring the entire company, and Claire's position as your right hand is obviously untenable. She'll be reassigned or let go. I haven't decided yet. You can't do that. She's worked for this company for 8 years. And she spent those 8 years enabling your worst impulses and undermining anyone who tried to hold you accountable, including me. Nia crossed her arms. So yes, I can do that. I can do whatever I want, Graham. That's what 90% ownership means. Graham stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You're enjoying this. No, Nia said honestly. I'm not. I wish none of this had been necessary. I wish you'd been the man I thought you were when we got married. I wish you'd treated me with even a fraction of the respect I deserved. But you didn't. So here we are. Graham walked around the desk toward her, and for a moment Nia tensed, wondering if he might actually become violent. But he stopped a few feet away, his hands hanging loose at his sides. If I'd known, he said quietly, would it have made a difference? Nia looked at him, really looked at him. This man she'd shared a life with, this man she'd seen at his best and worst, this man who'd somehow managed to be both a stranger and intimately familiar. No, she said finally. You would have treated me exactly the same. You might have been more careful about it, more strategic, but the contempt would still have been there. Because the problem was never about what I owned or didn't own, it was about who I was. A janitor's daughter, someone from outside your world, someone you thought you were doing a favor by marrying. Graham's face crumpled. That's not— It is. Nia's voice was gentle now, almost kind. And the saddest part is, I don't think you even realize it. I think you genuinely believe you loved me. But love doesn't look like what you did to me, Graham. Love doesn't humiliate. It doesn't diminish. It doesn't require someone to make themselves smaller so you can feel bigger. He turned away, his shoulders hunched. I'll be out by tomorrow. Thank you. Nia walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope you learn from this. I hope you find someone someday and treat them better than you treated me. I hope you figure out that power isn't the same as worth, and control isn't the same as respect. Graham didn't turn around. Get out, Nia. Please, just get out. She left him there in his study, surrounded by the trappings of a life that no longer belonged to him. The next morning, Nia woke early and went downstairs to find that Graham had left sometime in the night. His closet was half empty, his toiletries gone from the bathroom. He'd taken his clothes and his laptop and not much else. On the kitchen counter, he'd left his wedding ring. Nia picked it up, feeling the weight of the gold band in her palm. She thought about throwing it away, or selling it, or locking it in a box somewhere and forgetting about it. Instead, she put it in a drawer. Not because she wanted to keep it, but because she wasn't ready to decide what it meant yet. whether it was a reminder or a relic, a warning or a wound. Her phone rang. Marcus Chen. Naya, I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all. I've been up for hours. Good, because we need to talk strategy. The board is going to want clarity on leadership transition, corporate direction, the expansion plan that Graham was pushing. Marcus paused. How much have you thought about actually running the company? Nia walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the perfectly manicured garden that she'd never liked and never chosen. I've thought about it. And? And I'm not Graham. I'm not going to make impulsive decisions or treat this like a game. I want to do this right. Which means I need to understand every aspect of the business before I make major changes. I need to meet with department heads, review financials, talk to employees who actually do the work, instead of just managing from the top floor. She paused. I want to know what my father saw in this company, why he believed in it enough to invest everything he had. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That's good, Nia. That's actually really good. But you need to move quickly. The business world doesn't wait for people to figure things out. News of the leadership change is already spreading. Competitors are going to smell blood in the water. Investors are going to get nervous. You need to show them that you're in control. I am in control. Then prove it. Call a company-wide meeting. Today. Address everyone. Let them see who you are and what you stand for. Give them a reason to follow you instead of jumping ship. Nia's stomach tightened. Public speaking had never been her strength. She'd spent most of her adult life trying to be invisible, and now Marcus was asking her to stand in front of hundreds of employees and convince them she was worth following. But he was right. If she wanted to actually lead this company, she couldn't hide anymore. Okay, she said. Set it up for this afternoon, 2 o'clock, all employees, mandatory attendance. Done, Marcus paused. And Nia, you're going to be brilliant. She hung up and stood alone in the kitchen, trying to figure out what to say to a company full of people who'd watched her marry the boss, and probably assumed she was just another trophy wife. By noon, she had a rough outline. By 1:30, she was standing in the bathroom of Dalton Industries headquarters, staring at herself in the mirror and trying to remember how to breathe. Marcus found her there. You ready? No. Good. That means you care. He smiled. Come on, they're waiting. The company auditorium was packed. Nia stood backstage, peeking through the curtain at the sea of faces filling every seat. Employees from every department, every level, every corner of the company. She recognized some of them from charity events and corporate parties. Most were strangers. All of them were watching the stage with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to open hostility. Whenever you're ready, Marcus said quietly. Nia took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked onto the stage. The murmuring stopped. Hundreds of eyes locked onto her. She stood behind the podium, gripping its edges to keep her hands steady, and looked out at the crowd. Good afternoon, she said, her voice carrying through the speakers. My name is Nia Dalton, and as of yesterday, I became the majority owner and acting CEO of this company. A ripple of whispers moved through the audience. I know most of you are confused, some of you are angry, some of you are worried about what this means for your jobs, your projects, your futures here. Nia paused. Those are all valid concerns, and I'm not going to stand up here and pretend I have all the answers, or that this transition is going to be seamless, or that nothing is going to change, because things are going to change, starting now. The whispers grew louder. I'm not Graham Dalton, Nia continued, her voice steady. I don't have his charisma or his confidence or his ability to walk into a room and command attention. What I do have is a degree in economics from Stanford, a deep understanding of how this company actually works, and most importantly, respect for the people who make this company run. She saw a few heads nod in the crowd. My father was Raymond Chen. He worked here as a janitor for 30 years. He mopped your floors and emptied your trash cans and made sure this building was clean every morning when you arrived. Nia's voice caught slightly, but she pushed through. He was invisible to most of you, but he saw everything. He understood that a company isn't its executives or its board members or its quarterly reports. A company is its people, the engineers and accountants and assistants and maintenance workers, and everyone else who shows up every day and does the work that actually matters. The auditorium was completely silent now. So here's what's going to change. First, the reckless expansion plan that Graham was pushing, it's canceled. We're not going to risk the entire company's future on an impulsive gamble. Second, I'm going to be conducting a comprehensive review of every department, every project, every budget allocation. And I'm going to be talking to you, all of you, about what works, what doesn't, and what needs to change. Third, we're implementing transparency measures. You deserve to know how decisions are made and why. No more closed-door deals, no more information hoarded at the top. A few people started clapping, then a few more. Then the whole auditorium erupted in applause. Nia waited for it to die down before continuing. I know some of you are skeptical. You're wondering if I'm qualified to run a billion-dollar company. You're wondering if this is just some revenge plot against my ex-husband. You're wondering if I'm going to crash and burn in 6 months. She paused. Those are all fair questions, and I'm not going to make promises I can't keep. What I will promise is this. I will work harder than anyone in this building. I will listen to your ideas and your concerns. I will treat you with the respect you deserve, and I will do everything in my power to build a company that my father would have been proud to work for. The applause was thunderous this time. Nia stepped back from the podium, overwhelmed and exhausted and more terrified than she'd ever been in her life. But also, for the first time in 3 years, absolutely certain she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Marcus was waiting for her backstage, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. That, he said, was perfect. Nia's legs felt like jelly. I thought I was going to pass out. You didn't. You were commanding and authentic and exactly what this company needed to hear. Marcus pulled out his phone. The board is already texting me. They're impressed. Patricia Vance wants to set up a one-on-one. 2 other members want to discuss their departments with you directly. Okay. Nia's head was spinning. Okay, that's good. It's better than good. You just won over the entire company in 15 minutes. Marcus looked at her seriously. You know what you did in there? You gave them a leader they can actually believe in. Not someone who demands respect because of their last name, but someone who earns it through competence and integrity. That's rare, Nia, especially in this world. Nia's phone buzzed. She pulled it out and saw a text from a number she didn't recognize. Unknown. That speech was incredible. This is Jennifer from accounting. We're all rooting for you. Then another. Unknown. Thank you for canceling that expansion. We all thought it was a disaster waiting to happen, but no one would listen. David, operations. And another. Unknown. Your father would be proud. Maria, facilities. Nia's eyes welled with tears. She'd spent 3 years being invisible, being dismissed, being told she didn't matter. And now, standing backstage in a company that her father had helped build with his invisible labor, surrounded by messages from people who actually saw her, actually valued her, actually believed in her. She finally understood what power was supposed to feel like. Not dominance, not control, responsibility. And she was ready for it. The messages kept coming for the rest of the afternoon, flooding her phone with support from employees she'd never met, people whose names she was only beginning to learn. Nia sat in what had been Graham's office, her office now, and read each one, her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It felt like validation and vindication, and something deeper. Something that made her think of her father coming home after long night shifts, exhausted but satisfied, telling her that honest work mattered even when no one noticed. They were noticing now. Marcus appeared in the doorway around 4, knocking lightly, even though the door was open. You have a visitor. Nia looked up from her laptop where she'd been reviewing departmental budgets that revealed exactly how reckless Graham's spending had been. Who? Claire Hart. Nia's jaw tightened. Tell her I'm busy. I did. She says she'll wait as long as it takes. Nia sat back in her chair, considering. She could avoid Claire indefinitely, could have security escort her out, could make her disappear the same way Graham had made so many problems disappear over the years. But that wasn't who Nia wanted to be. She didn't want to hide from uncomfortable conversations or wield her power like a weapon against people who'd wronged her, even if they deserved it. Send her in, Nia said, finally. Claire entered the office a moment later, and Nia was struck by how different she looked. Gone was the polished confidence, the careful styling, the aura of someone who always knew exactly where they stood. Claire looked smaller somehow, her expensive clothes rumpled, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "Thank you for seeing me," Claire said quietly. Nia gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit." Claire sat, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on some point beyond Nia's shoulder. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I'm sorry," Claire said finally, the words barely above a whisper. Nia waited. "I told myself I was being a good friend to both of you, that I was helping Graham see reason, helping you navigate a difficult situation. But the truth is," Claire's voice cracked, "the truth is, I was protecting myself. I saw how Graham treated you, and instead of standing up for you, I stayed quiet because speaking up would have meant risking my position, my access, my relationship with the family. And that was cowardly." "Yes," Nia said simply. "It was." Claire flinched but didn't look away. "I know you're going to fire me. I know I don't deserve anything else. But before you do, I need you to understand something." She took a shaky breath. "When you stood up in that board meeting and revealed what you owned, when you took everything from Graham in front of everyone, I wasn't horrified because you destroyed him. I was horrified because I realized I'd spent 8 years working for the wrong person, believing in the wrong person, protecting the wrong person." "And what would you have done differently?" Nia asked. "If you could go back, knowing what you know now." Claire finally met her eyes. "I would have been your friend instead of his. A real friend. The kind who tells you the truth even when it's uncomfortable. The kind who stands beside you instead of watching from a safe distance." Nia studied her for a long moment. She wanted to feel anger, wanted to let Claire's betrayal fuel her decision to remove everyone who'd enabled Graham's cruelty. But instead, she just felt tired. Tired of carrying resentment. Tired of cataloging everyone's failures. "You're not fired," Nia said. Claire's head snapped up. "What?" "You're not fired, but you're being transferred. I need someone I can trust in operations, someone who understands how this company actually functions beyond the executive theater. You'll report to Patricia Vance, and you'll be working on efficiency improvements and employee satisfaction initiatives." Nia paused. "You'll also be taking a 20% pay cut." Claire seemed to be struggling to process this. "I don't understand. Why would you keep me?" "Because everyone deserves a chance to be better than they were," Nia said quietly. "Graham never gave people that chance. He just discarded them when they stopped being useful. I'm not going to run this company that way." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You're going to earn this, every day. And if I find out you're undermining me or feeding information to Graham or playing any of the games you used to play, you're done. No second chances. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear." Claire stood, wiping her eyes. "I won't let you down." "See that you don't." Claire left, and Nia returned to her budgets, but her mind kept drifting. She thought about grace and accountability, about the difference between being merciful and being weak. Her father had believed in second chances, had always said that people were more than their worst moments, but he'd also believed in consequences, in making sure people understood the weight of their choices. Nia was trying to find the balance. The next visitor came an hour later, and this one Nia hadn't expected. Evelyn Dalton swept into the office without knocking, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floor, her posture as imperious as ever. She sat down in the chair Claire had vacated and looked at Nia with an expression that was difficult to read. "I thought we should talk," Evelyn said. "Did you?" "Don't be childish, Nia. We're both adults. We both understand how the world works." Evelyn crossed her legs at the ankle, her movements precise and controlled. "I underestimated you. That was a mistake. I'm not accustomed to making mistakes, but when I do, I acknowledge them." "Is that an apology?" "It's a recognition of reality." Evelyn's eyes were sharp. "You outmaneuvered my son. You outmaneuvered all of us. That takes intelligence and patience and a level of strategic thinking I didn't believe you possessed." "Because I was a janitor's daughter." "Yes," Evelyn said simply. "I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. I judged you based on your background, your education, your manner of speaking. I assumed you were out of your depth. I was wrong." Nia leaned back in her chair. "Why are you here, Evelyn?" Because I want to understand what you're planning to do with the company, with Graham, with the family legacy. Evelyn's voice was measured, but Nia could hear the tension underneath. My late husband spent 40 years building Dalton Industries. It was his life's work. And now it belongs to someone who married into the family 3 years ago. No, Nia corrected gently. It belongs to someone whose father invested in this company when it was struggling and no one else would. Someone who inherited those shares legally and properly. Someone who happens to be a member of this family, whether you like it or not. Evelyn's jaw tightened. What are you going to do? I'm going to run it, Nia said. Properly. Sustainably. With integrity. I'm going to honor what your husband built without letting his son destroy it. And I'm going to make sure that every person who works here, from the executives to the janitors, is treated with dignity and respect. And Graham? What about him? Are you going to destroy him completely, ruin his reputation, make sure he never works in this industry again? Evelyn's voice was carefully neutral, but her hands gripped the armrests of her chair. He's my son, Nia. Regardless of what he did to you, he's still my son. Nia thought about the man who'd spit on her in front of strangers, who'd cheated and lied and spent 3 years systematically dismantling her sense of self-worth. She thought about how easy it would be to return that cruelty, to use her power to ensure Graham never recovered from this humiliation. But she also thought about her father, who'd believed that revenge poisoned the person seeking it more than the person it was aimed at. I'm not interested in destroying Graham, Nia said finally. I'm interested in protecting this company and the people who depend on it. What Graham does with his life after this is his choice. If he wants to rebuild his reputation, learn from his mistakes, and become someone better, that's possible. But it's not my responsibility to make it happen, and it's not my job to protect him from the consequences of his actions. Evelyn was silent for a long moment. That's more generous than he deserves. Probably, Nia agreed. But I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for me. Because becoming the kind of person who destroys others for satisfaction isn't who I want to be. Evelyn stood, smoothing her skirt. I misjudged you, Nia, thoroughly and completely. That doesn't happen to me often. I know. For what it's worth, I think you'll be good for this company. Better than Graham would have been. Evelyn paused at the door. And if you ever need advice on navigating the social and political aspects of this world, the galas and fundraisers and networking events that come with being a CEO, I'd be willing to help. Nia raised an eyebrow. Why would you do that? Because you're family, Evelyn said simply. And because my husband would have liked you. He believed in competence over pedigree, in substance over style. You embody that. She opened the door, then glanced back. Also, you're divorcing my son, presumably? Yes. Good. He needs to experience real consequences for once in his life. Evelyn's smile was sharp. And you need to be free of the Dalton name so people can see you for what you are, not who you married. She left before Nia could respond. Nia sat alone in the office as the afternoon light shifted to evening, processing the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she'd been invisible, dismissed, powerless. Now she was running a billion-dollar company, receiving support from employees she'd never met, and having surprisingly honest conversations with people who'd spent years treating her like furniture. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Marcus, board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. They want to officially approve your appointment as CEO and discuss transition planning. Are you ready? Nia looked around the office at the expensive furniture and the view of the city and the family photos Graham had left behind, still sitting on the credenza like ghosts of a life that no longer existed. Nia, yes, I'm ready. The board meeting the next morning was almost anticlimactic. Patricia Vance moved to officially appoint Nia as CEO, Marcus seconded, and the vote was unanimous. There were questions about strategy and timelines and departmental restructuring, but they were practical questions, professional questions, the kind of questions that treated Nia like a competent executive rather than an interloper who'd stolen someone else's position. When the meeting ended, several board members stayed behind to introduce themselves properly and offer their support. Patricia pulled Nia aside and said, "I've been on this board for 12 years, and that speech you gave to the employees yesterday was the most honest thing I've heard in this building. Don't lose that authenticity as you settle into the role." Nia promised she wouldn't. Over the following weeks, she threw herself into learning every aspect of the company. She met with department heads and project managers and employees who'd never been invited to share their insights before. She discovered inefficiencies that had persisted for years because no one had bothered to ask the people doing the actual work what needed to change. She found projects that Graham had approved without understanding their purpose, budget allocations that made no sense, and partnerships that existed purely to make him look impressive rather than to benefit the company. She also found unexpected brilliance, engineers with ideas that could revolutionize their industry if someone would just listen and provide resources, accountants who'd identified cost-saving measures that had been ignored, assistants who understood client relationships better than the executives they supported. Nia listened to all of them, took notes, asked questions, and began making changes. She canceled the reckless expansion plan and redirected those resources toward research and development. She implemented transparent decision-making processes and regular town halls where employees could voice concerns. She created pathways for advancement based on merit rather than connections. She established partnerships with organizations that supported underprivileged students interested in STEM fields, creating internships and scholarships in her father's name. Slowly, carefully, she built something that felt less like a corporation and more like a community. Not everyone was happy about the changes. 3 executives who'd thrived under Graham's chaotic leadership resigned rather than adapt to accountability measures. Miles, surprisingly, stayed on, though he was moved to a position where his talents for networking and relationship building could be useful, but his tendency toward recklessness could be monitored. He seemed almost amused by the demotion, like he appreciated the honesty of it. "You're scarier than Graham ever was," he told Nia one day, catching her in the hallway between meetings. "He ruled through fear and ego. You rule through competence and integrity, much harder to fight against." "I'm not trying to scare anyone," Nia said. "I know, that's what makes it scary." Miles grinned. "For what it's worth, I think you're going to be extraordinary at this. Don't tell Graham I said that." "I don't talk to Graham." "Smart." Miles's expression turned serious. "He's not doing well, by the way, in case you were wondering." Nia had been carefully not wondering, had been actively avoiding any information about Graham's life after the board meeting. But now that Miles had brought it up, she found herself curious despite herself. "What do you mean?" "He's living in a studio apartment in Oakland, working as a consultant for a startup that's probably going to fail in 6 months, drinking too much, avoiding everyone from our old life." Miles shrugged. "He burned a lot of bridges on his way down. Turns out people are less interested in Graham Dalton when he doesn't have power or money or the family name backing him up." Nia should have felt satisfaction at that, should have felt vindicated, or at least indifferent. Instead, she felt sad. "I hope he figures it out," she said quietly. Miles looked surprised. "Really?" "Really? I don't want him to suffer forever. I just want him to understand what he did and become someone better." "You're a better person than I am," Miles said. "I'd be throwing a party." "No, you wouldn't," Nia said. "You pretend to be callous, but you're not. You care about your brother, you just hide it behind sarcasm." Miles opened his mouth, closed it, then laughed. "Okay, maybe you're right, but don't expect me to admit that in front of anyone else." He walked away, and Nia continued to her next meeting, her mind still on Graham. She thought about him sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and she was alone with her thoughts. She thought about the man she'd married and the man he'd become, about whether those were 2 different people or if she'd just been willfully blind to who he really was. She thought about forgiveness and whether it required the other person to deserve it or if it was something you did for yourself. She hadn't decided yet. 3 months after taking over as CEO, Nia received an unexpected email. The subject line was simple: "Thank you." She opened it, her heart speeding up when she saw the sender's name: Graham. The message was short. "Nia, I don't expect you to respond to this. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation or anything else I don't deserve. I just wanted you to know that I've spent the last 3 months thinking about what you said in the boardroom, about how quiet doesn't mean weak and invisible doesn't mean powerless. I dismissed you for 3 years because I couldn't see past my own ego and insecurity. I treated you like you were worthless because accepting your worth would have meant confronting my own inadequacy. That was cruel and inexcusable, and I'm sorry. I'm working with a therapist now, trying to understand why I became the kind of person who could spit on someone he claimed to love, trying to figure out how to be better. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'm trying. I hope the company is thriving under your leadership. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Graham. Nia read the email 3 times, her emotions tangled and complicated. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough to undo 3 years of cruelty, but it was something. She closed the email without responding, but she didn't delete it either. She filed it away in a folder labeled Graham and returned to her work. Maybe someday she'd respond. Maybe she'd tell him that she appreciated his efforts to change, that she wished him well, that she'd let go of the anger she'd carried for so long. But not today. Today, she had a company to run. 6 months into her tenure as CEO, Dalton Industries posted its strongest quarterly earnings in 5 years. The announcement came during a board meeting, with Patricia presenting the financial reports and Marcus grinning like he'd personally engineered the success. The restructuring was working. The employee satisfaction scores were up. Client retention had improved. New partnerships were generating revenue. The company was not just surviving without Graham, it was thriving. "I think this calls for a celebration," Marcus said. "Drinks on me tonight?" Several board members agreed enthusiastically. Nia smiled but shook her head. "I appreciate the offer, but I have somewhere else to be." She left the meeting and drove across the city to a small cemetery in Daly City, parking near the entrance and walking through rows of headstones until she found the one she was looking for. Raymond Chen, beloved father, 1955 to 2022. Nia knelt beside her father's grave and placed her hand on the cool stone. "I did it, Dad," she said quietly. "I actually did it. I'm running the company you helped build with your labor and your investment and your faith that people were worth believing in." Her voice caught. "I wish you were here to see it. I wish you could walk into that building and have people recognize you, thank you, understand what you contributed. But since you can't—" She paused, wiping her eyes. "I'm making sure they remember. There's a scholarship in your name now, and a community center we're funding. And I'm working on getting a plaque in the lobby that honors all the facilities workers who've kept this company running over the years, people like you. People who made everything possible even when no one noticed." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the salt smell of the ocean. "I know you'd tell me not to hold grudges," Nia continued. "You tell me to forgive Graham, to move on, to let go of the past. And I'm trying, Dad. I really am. But it's hard. Some days I'm angry about everything I lost, everything he took from me. And other days I'm just grateful, because his cruelty forced me to find strength I didn't know I had. It forced me to stop hiding and start living." She sat there for a long time, talking to her father the way she used to when he was alive, telling him about the company and the changes she was making and the people who'd surprised her with their kindness. She told him about Marcus and Patricia and even Miles, about Claire's tentative redemption and Evelyn's grudging respect. She told him about the employees who sent her messages of support and the projects that were finally getting the resources they needed and the culture that was slowly, carefully shifting towards something healthier. And she told him about the divorce papers she'd signed that morning, officially ending her marriage to Graham and reclaiming her maiden name. Nia Chen. Not Nia Dalton, just herself. When she finally stood to leave, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She touched the headstone one more time and whispered, "I love you, Dad. Thank you for believing I was worth more than the world told me I was. Thank you for giving me the tools to prove it." She drove home as darkness fell, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. It felt like hers. Over the following months, Nia continued building the company she'd envisioned. She hired a new CFO who shared her commitment to sustainable growth and ethical business practices. She established employee resource groups and mental health support programs. She created transparent promotion pathways and implemented regular feedback systems that actually listened to what people had to say. She also started dating again, cautiously and without expectations, learning to trust her own judgment about people rather than accepting whatever version of themselves they chose to perform. Some dates went well, others didn't, but none of them involved anyone who made her feel small or invisible or worthless, and that felt like progress. A year after taking over as CEO, Nia received another email from Graham. This one was different. Nia, I'm getting married. I wanted you to hear it from me rather than through gossip. Her name is Amanda, and she's nothing like you, which is probably for the best. She calls me out when I'm being an ass, doesn't tolerate my ego, and generally refuses to let me get away with the kind of behavior I subjected you to. I'm still in therapy, still working on being better, still failing sometimes, but failing less often than before. I don't expect you to care about any of this. I just thought you should know that what you did, exposing me, stripping away my power, forcing me to confront who I'd become, it destroyed me for a while, but it also saved me. I'm not grateful for how it happened, but I'm grateful for what it taught me. I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. I hope you've built something extraordinary out of what I tried to break. Graham. Nia read the email once, then closed her laptop. She didn't respond, but she did smile. Because Graham learning to be better wasn't her responsibility or her victory, it was his. The only thing that mattered was that she'd learned to be herself, fully, unapologetically, powerfully herself, and that no one could take that away from her ever again. 2 years after the board meeting that changed everything, Dalton Industries underwent a rebranding. The new name, Chen Dalton Industries. It honored both the family that had built the company and the man whose invisible labor and quiet investment had saved it. The announcement was made at a company-wide celebration, with employees from every department gathered in the main atrium, champagne flowing, and speeches from board members praising Nia's leadership. Patricia Vance said, "In 2 years, Nia Chen has transformed this company from a corporation teetering on the edge of reckless expansion into a model of sustainable growth and ethical leadership. She's proven that you don't need to sacrifice integrity for success, that you don't need to rule through fear to inspire excellence, and that the most powerful leaders are the ones who empower everyone around them." Marcus Chen added, "I've worked with dozens of CEOs over my career. Most of them were competent, some were brilliant. But Nia is the only one I've ever seen who genuinely cares about every single person in this building, from the executive suite to the facilities team. That's not just good leadership, that's transformative leadership." When it was Nia's turn to speak, she stood before the crowd, hundreds of faces, hundreds of people who'd chosen to believe in her vision and felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. "When I first walked into this building as Graham Dalton's wife," she said, "I was invisible. People looked through me, not at me. They saw a woman who'd married into power, not someone who deserved power of her own. And for a long time, I believed them. I made myself smaller, quieter, less significant because that's what I thought survival required." The room was completely silent. But then something happened. I remembered who I was before I started performing the role everyone expected. I remembered my father, who worked in this building for 30 years and never once apologized for who he was or where he came from. I remembered that dignity isn't something other people give you, it's something you claim for yourself. And I decided to stop being invisible. She paused, looking around at the faces watching her. This company bears my father's name now because he was part of building it, even when no one acknowledged that. Because the people who do the work that keeps organizations running deserve to be recognized, not just tolerated, because a company is only as strong as the people it serves and the values it upholds. The applause started slowly, then built into something thunderous. Nia raised her glass. "To Chen Dalton Industries, to every person who shows up and does the work, to integrity over ego, to transparency over control, and to building something that matters, together." "To Chen Dalton!" the crowd echoed, their voices filling the atrium, shaking the walls, announcing to the world that something had fundamentally changed. That evening, after the celebration ended and the building emptied, Nia stood alone in her office, looking out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Unknown. "I saw the announcement. Chen Dalton Industries. He would have been so proud. Amanda." Nia stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. "Nia, thank you. I hope you and Graham are happy." The response came quickly. "Amanda, We're working on it. And for what it's worth, he talks about you sometimes, not with bitterness, with regret and respect. I think losing you taught him what I've been trying to teach him since we met, that how you treat people when you have power over them reveals everything about your character. Nia. He's lucky to have found someone willing to hold him accountable. Amanda. We're both lucky you showed us it was possible. Nia set her phone down and returned her gaze to the window. She thought about power and how people used it. She thought about Graham, who'd wielded it like a weapon until it destroyed him. She thought about Evelyn, who'd wielded it like armor to protect herself from vulnerability. She thought about Claire, who'd wielded it by proximity, always staying close to whoever had the most. And she thought about herself, about how she was learning to wield power not as a weapon or armor or borrowed authority, but as responsibility, as stewardship, as the ability to create space for other people to thrive. It was harder this way. It required constant attention and humility and the willingness to admit mistakes and learn from them. But it was also the only way she could live with herself. Nia Chen left the office that night knowing that she'd built something real, something sustainable, something that honored her father's legacy and created a better future for everyone who depended on the company. She'd stopped being invisible. She'd stopped being powerless. She'd stopped being anything other than exactly who she was meant to be. And the world would never look through her again. 3 years after the revelation in the boardroom, Nia stood on a stage at Stanford University, delivering a commencement address to graduating students who looked both terrified and exhilarated about their futures. "You're about to enter a world that will try to tell you who you should be," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd of graduates and families. "That will try to make you smaller or quieter or more palatable. That will mistake your kindness for weakness, your patience for passivity, your dignity for defeat." She paused, remembering the woman she'd been, the woman who'd sat silent while her husband spat on her in front of strangers. Don't believe those voices. Don't let anyone else define your worth. And don't ever, ever underestimate the power of knowing exactly who you are and refusing to apologize for it. The graduates erupted in applause. Later, as Nia mingled with students and faculty, a young woman approached her nervously. "Ms. Chen? I just wanted to say thank you. I read about what you did, how you took over the company, and it gave me the courage to stand up to my own situation. I was in a relationship where someone made me feel worthless, and your story helped me realize I deserved better." Nia took the young woman's hand. "You do deserve better, and I'm so glad you found the strength to claim it. Did you ever forgive him, your ex-husband?" Nia considered the question carefully. "I let go of the anger. I stopped letting what he did define me. Whether that's forgiveness or just peace, I'm not sure. But either way, it freed me to build the life I actually wanted instead of staying trapped in the one I'd survived." The young woman nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, really." As Nia watched her walk away, she thought about all the people who'd reached out over the past 3 years, sharing their own stories of surviving invisibility, of finding their power, of refusing to be diminished anymore. She thought about the company that bore her father's name, thriving under leadership that valued people over profits. She thought about Graham, hopefully learning to be better, hopefully treating Amanda with the respect he'd never given Nia. She thought about Claire and Miles and Evelyn and Marcus and Patricia and all the others who'd been part of this complicated, messy, ultimately transformative journey. And she thought about herself, standing in the sunlight on a university campus, no longer invisible, no longer silent, no longer anything other than exactly who she'd fought to become. Nia Chen, daughter of a janitor, CEO of Chen Dalton Industries, woman who'd survived being spit on and emerged powerful enough to change an entire corporate culture. Not because she'd sought revenge, but because she'd remembered her worth. And in remembering, she'd shown countless others how to remember theirs. The quiet girl who'd been dismissed and diminished and told she didn't belong had become the woman who'd rebuilt an empire on foundations of dignity, integrity, and the revolutionary belief that every person mattered. And she'd done it not by becoming louder or harder or more ruthless than those who'd tried to break her. She'd done it by becoming exactly who she'd always been, underneath all the performance and survival and fear. Herself. Powerful, capable, worthy. Finally, irrevocably, free.